were you going into the next chapter?
No, I was just going to try to finish up skepticism.
Alright.
And if we end early, it wouldn't be the end of the world. I'm sure
No,
everybody would
no.
complain, right? We'll see.
Because I was going to say that I really, I thought the immediate perceptual justification was pretty alluring.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah, I do too.
And I said this in the comment with my reply, that when he said one difficulty for IPJ is that it seems somewhat ad hoc.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, not necessarily, but like if you're supposed to come up with a principle, like specifically to negate whatever it was, the alternative hypothesis argument, like
Yeah.
you're supposed to come up with a principle like proving why that's wrong, like wouldn't it be ad hoc? You know what I mean? Like actually, like.
Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, like, to me, it also, and I didn't say that in my comments because that seemed kind of like a side, like, comment I could make in here. But in my response, I said, well, it doesn't really seem that hot because it seems like kind of like a true principle in general, regardless if it's talking about, you know, specifically to the alternative hypothesis or whatever.
Cool.
It's like, it seems like it's necessary that you, and then,
Well, I'm going to get that argument up so we can talk it because we're jumping right in, so I might as well put it up here so we can set the stage a little bit, Tom.
well, then one question that I did have was, in the 3 people in the garden,
Yeah.
example,
Right.
I tried to respond to that, how he said that somebody should respond to it if you take IPJ seriously.
Yeah.
So I tried to respond to it in my remarks online.
Well, here's the thing: is I'm unfortunately been scrambling all day. It seems like so I didn't get a chance to look at what people wrote, and I should have. So this is a good opportunity for you guys to tell me what you wrote and help save my voice because I felt like I was starting to lose my voice again this morning in my first section.
All right.
So maybe we just should go slow and set the stage and get up to where we're at. Is that cool with you?
Oh, totally.
Yeah, good, because there's definitely plenty to talk about. So welcome back to our online students. I've got some postings out there. What happened was I got a little out of sequence with the discussion boards and jumped ahead of the game a little. So there's the latest, the current one is the last one on skepticism, ordinary standard skepticism, and best explanations. And then I've got another one out there, I guess it would be discussion 8, I think is what it would be. It's on naturalized epistemology. So here's the plan. I'm going to try to get the second exam posted on Canvas tonight. And if that happens, then I'll make an announcement and you'll get a notification that way, I assume. It'll be the same format as the last exam. It'll be 2 questions, 50 points each. And no surprises, just over the new material in Feldman since the last exam. I think I want to try to have that due next Wednesday by midnight. Is that going to give people enough time? That's a week. Yeah. The reason why is I'm afraid that if I push it to next Friday, people will take that long. And then what will happen is that'll run into our ability to have people do the readings for the following week, and that's when we start the student-led presentations. I'll also be trying to come up with some sort of general guidelines for what I'm looking for the student presentations. Of course, our online students, I'll be emailing you with some directions as well, because you'll be making videos instead of obviously being here in the classroom with the rest of the group. The main thing about the presentations, though, that I already know for sure is don't miss your presentation day. Because if you don't show up on the day that you're supposed to present, then I'm in trouble, right? Because what are we going to do? So if you do have to miss or you need to reschedule it, give me enough advance notice so that I can have something else for us to do. Like I'll select another article and we'll all supposed to have read that. That's the other point, is that even though you're not the one doing the presentation on a particular day, the expectation is, and my hope is that people will read the article that's being presented, at least scan it or something, right? Skim over it so that you have some idea of what's going on, and it won't just be a book report by the person doing the discussion. So I see it more as kind of like leading a discussion where people can jump in and ask questions and get clarification, as opposed to a formal stand. If you want to stand up here, that's fine, but I might swivel them just so I can have something to post out there for the online folks. And it is good practice to do some presenting because we all hate public speaking. I know that, you know that. But the fact is, probably whatever job you end up getting, there'll be a speaking component that you weren't expecting, right? So like my brother, for example, he's a salesman. He sells stuff, and you would think, that's just he doesn't do a lot of speaking. He actually has to do presentations all the time. So it's turned out to be that way for him. So that's that part. So the test, heads up on the presentation, confirm your dates, confirm your article, other things. It seems like in any given meeting, we've got like a different group of people missing. That's okay, I get it, but attendance is important, and that's a factor in the final grade, so bear that in mind. It's a small group to start with, so, okay. So the plan for next Monday is to talk about naturalized epistemology and see if we can get through chapter 8, and then next Wednesday would be, if it works out right, next Wednesday would be the final chapter in Feldman, which is relativism about knowledge. I'm not in a hurry, but if we can stay on schedule, that just makes things easier. Not too soon to begin thinking about your final paper, since there's going to be a rewrite of that. That's a paper with a rough draft and a revision. All right. So today the game plan is to talk about this last portion of chapter 7 on skepticism. And Dominic's already jumped into it. There's a lot of good stuff in here to think about. For my own part, I have to say, I found myself as I was reading back through it. It's been a while since I've looked at it. Actually trying to wanting to defend the skeptics a little bit. Feeling like maybe Alan's persuading me or something. It's rubbing off on me. But I started feeling like, I've known Rich for a long, long time, and he's a really good epistemologist. And I'm ultimately, I guess, anti-skeptical myself. In the technical sense, right? Like, I believe that there's an external world of ordinary middle-sized objects, and that my experiences are being caused in the commonsensical, normal way. But I do think that he makes some points about how hard it is to get the details right, to say just exactly what it is about the common sense hypothesis and our justification for it, right? That makes it that makes it the right one, right? As opposed to these skeptical alternatives, because when you start looking at it seems like all the different proposals he considers, all three of them, none of them quite nails it, right? We all have our favorites. So in any case, I've got the stuff up here on the projector, just so we're all on the same page. So we've got ordinary standard skepticism, right? Which is just this idea that we lack knowledge because we don't meet the ordinary standards. Now, that's in contrast to the high standard skepticism we've already looked at, right? So high standard stuff is the typical kind of Cartesian stuff where there's some assumption being made about the conditions for knowledge requiring certainty or infallibility or some sort of introspective indistinguishability, some feature that essentially is conclusive that would amount to a conclusive reason for thinking that the world is the way we perceive it to be. We've seen that one way of getting around that is fallibilism, right? Then we talked about Hume's problem last time, the problem of induction, and that's, you could have a whole semester-long course on that, as well as the new riddle of induction, Nelson Goodman's problem of induction, which I didn't talk about, and Feldman doesn't really mention as far as I can remember. So we've got O, right, which is I have memory and perceptual experiences that are regular and orderly, and we want to explain that, right? So what's the best explanation of O? Well, the common sense hypothesis, I've got it just so we can remind ourselves. There's a world of enduring and relatively stable physical objects. My experiences are typically caused by these objects stimulating my sense organs, but there's a host of skeptical alternatives, right? This is just to sort of set the stage to get to where Don's at. So some different famous skeptical hypotheses, the BIV hypothesis, the brain in a vat. This, as far as I know, I'm not a historian even of contemporary philosophy, but I'm pretty sure this is due to Putnam, Hilary Putnam, who just died.
Yes.
Yeah, really. Yeah, really. Did you see was there like a write-up that went along with it?
No, it was like right when it had been announced, so I just was surprised.
Yeah, it was. I saw my colleague of mine, Dr. Jones, sent me a link to a thing about it, and it mentioned Pat McCrory and Marco Rubio. This is a tangent, but we're allowed to do that since it's a senior level course. So apparently Marco Rubio, I didn't know this, but it doesn't surprise me, said something like, we need fewer philosophers and more welders or something. And then I guess McCrory said something, again, it sort of made some comments about, the worthlessness of a philosophy degree and that nobody needs to get a philosophy degree. And I just thought, this is some really bad stuff, right? I mean, Putnam dies and we get to hear all this stuff. We're North Carolina's in the news for this. So in any case, but yeah, sad thing. Hilary Putnam, it's hard to rank philosophers. I mean, especially since history is the ultimate judge. of who's going to be in the top 10 from their century. But Putnam's possibly in contention, I would say. I mean, he's made a lot of important contributions and super smart guy. I never got to meet him at any conference, but he was pretty old too, wasn't he? Like 92? Yeah, so he lasts a long time. But in any case, in a famous, wasn't really an article, but a famous chapter from one of his books, Putnam, called Brains and Vats, Putnam, elaborates this idea, this hypothesis. And it's basically just kind of Descartes dressed up, if you think about it, or the Matrix kind of, sort of thing. We're supposed to imagine that last night when you were sleeping, a crack team of neuroscientists snuck into your bedroom and they anesthetized you. And from that point on, right, you don't know anything that's going on. They take you somewhere and they remove your brain, they explant your brain from your skull, and they hook it up and put it in a big vat of nutrient fluid. It's bathing the brain, and then there are, however many electrodes that you need to get yourself convinced of this thing. It would be a lot, because the brain is incredibly complicated, right? But a whole bunch of electrodes, all wired back to arrays of supercomputers that are programmed, running a program, in fact, that simulates whatever it is you want to do. And so, the brains in the vats, they take their experiences at face value just like we do, and they think they're in a room with other people right now listening to a lecture, when in fact they're just being stimulated artificially by the computer program, right? The microelectrodes are electrically stimulating the parts of the brain in the right way so as to give them that experience. But of course, the brains in vats, they don't have bodies, they're not in a room with other people, let's suppose. And ultimately, Putnam's sort of purpose in that, coming up with that hypothesis, was to try to argue that we could know that we weren't in fact brains in vats. But he does it in a way that Feldman doesn't discuss. In the short version, because it would take us pretty far off, but the short version is that he appeals to a theory of meaning. Basically, it's a sort of semantic response to skepticism. He thinks that we can show that the brain in a vat hypothesis is essentially self-refuting, because we can think the thought. So the idea is that part of how statements get their meanings is at least when they're about the external world, is in virtue of causal connections. So my claim that the cup is on the table, that proposition that the cup is on the table, means what it does in virtue of a causal connection between my correct acquisition of the word cup and the word table. And so the meaning of cup is that thing, the referent, and the meaning of table is this thing, the other referent, right? And those are objects in the external world. If I'd never really been in touch with cups and tables for real, causally, then the meanings of those words would be different than they are. But because I can think these various thoughts about the world, Putnam seems to think that somehow shows that skepticism's self-refuting or a mistake. And it's been the subject of a lot of attention. A lot of people, it's called semantic externalism is the idea. And he uses these twin earth thought experiments as well. He's the one who sort of famously developed those. So that's the BIV hypothesis. We got the dream hypothesis, which we all know, right, from our Descartes time, that all of my experiences are actually just dreamed experiences, orderly though they may be. And then the evil genius, right, again from Descartes Meditation 1 near the very end, where you remember how Descartes sort of gradually escalates his skepticism. So he starts up, he's looking for reasons for doubt. And an important thing to know, and I assume everybody knows this, I hope so, but it'd be remiss of me to allow you to graduate and maybe go to graduate school in philosophy thinking that Descartes was a skeptic. He's not, all right? Descartes is anti-skeptical. But a lot of people just read Meditation 1 and stop. And if you do that, and you never read the rest of it, then you could come away with the impression that he's a lunatic or a crazy skeptical person, right? Because he starts off challenging his beliefs about the external world, right? Knowledge based on the senses, by pointing out that, well, hey, the senses are fallible, and anything that's fallible maybe shouldn't be completely trusted. And so that would quickly undermine a lot of our knowledge, right, to pointing out the fallibility of sense perception. But then he responds and he says, yeah, but we learn from experience which situations are the trustworthy ones and which ones aren't for the senses. And so that argument goes down. Second reason for doubt, of course, is the possibility that he's dreaming everything. And if you read that passage carefully, I mean, I'm not a Descartes scholar, but we could ask Professor Bottenberg or Rosenfeld, because they know quite a bit about the history of philosophy. But it seems to me, as I read that he's right on the precipice there. He seems to think that maybe there aren't any conclusive indications that would distinguish waking life from dreamed experiences, in which case that dream argument looks like it's, at least in his mind, good. Part of the work is to figure out what a conclusive indicator, what would count as a conclusive indicator. And the way I've always sort of dissected it was, it would need to be something that on the one hand is necessarily present when and only when you're either awake or when and only when you're dreaming. But then the second condition is it has to be something that you can tell whether or not it's present from the inside, so to speak. In other words, introspectively and without having to already know whether you're dreaming or whether you're awake. And if that's what a conclusive indicator amounts to, then it does look like you can find things that satisfy the first condition but not the second, and vice versa. But Descartes doesn't stop there. He says, well, maybe there is something about my experience that I'm overlooking, some feature of it that I can seize on that will allow me to know reliably that I'm awake whenever I think that I am and not dreaming. And that's when at the very end of meditation 1, that brings him to the evil genius, or the evil demon hypothesis, right? Because that's his ultimate reason for doubt. That all of his experiences are actually being caused, as I say here, by an evil genius. The genius causes me to have regular and orderly experiences in order to trick me into believing the common sense hypothesis. So these are just some possibilities. There's no limit to these things, as you know, but that then gives us this argument, as Dominic was referring to, right? The alternative hypotheses argument. And so we can take a look at this. Premise 1, the evidence people have, right, which is O, right, that I have memory experiences, right? What did I say here? I have memory and perceptual experiences that are regular and orderly. So that's O. Does not provide a better reason to believe the ordinary external world propositions and the common sense view than to believe the rival skeptical hypotheses. If one's premise 2, if one's evidence doesn't provide a better reason to believe one hypothesis than to believe some rival, then one's not justified in the hypothesis. So it looks like people aren't justified in believing and thus don't know any of their ordinary external world beliefs to be true. Yeah, this is an interesting argument, right? It's valid. So if the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true. Always, whenever I am presented with an argument, and I think I just picked this up from my years of study with people like Feldman and Connie. First thing I always want to get people to do is tell me, and even in your tests or in your final papers, this is a good thing, or your presentation. Always a good idea if the argument hasn't been formulated as premises leading to a conclusion. I like to see that. Different people like different things, but that's something that I'm impressed by. So if you need to construct the argument, you need help with that. If it's not already done for you in the article that you've selected, email me, see me in office hours or whatever, and I can help you out with that, because it can be hard to do. Yeah.
So you're saying you want to see like a little formal
I like that.
With you?
Yeah. Basically as a sort of a rubric or a model for the style that I'm looking for, and this is just me. It's kind of like, I can't tell you what Professor Rosencrantz or Professor Leplin's going to want. Everybody has their own thing, but for me at least, I take Feldman as a kind of model of the style that I'm after. So on your test and in your papers, if there's a principle, don't just refer to it, just state the principle so we can see what it is we're all talking about. Yeah.
Would you want us to make a formal argument, present a formal argument after we make it informal, so you have the whole argument in the paragraph?
Yeah.
And after that be
here's a formal statement.
Formal formulation or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's good, because that gives people if you just jump right into the formal stuff, a lot of times it's sort of unintuitive.
Yeah.
And I think that the argument needs to be motivated, and that can be done in a prosy way. And some people are better writers than others. There are some really good philosophers that, aren't great writers in terms of style, as far as stylists. And I think there are people that are really great stylists, but they just don't have, it's kind of fluffy, there's not much content. So obviously the goal would be to strike a balance and, do both of those at a high level. But, at the end of the day, I guess what I'm most concerned about is getting it right more than the style. But of course, if it's so poorly written, that you can't figure out what the person's saying. And that's nobody here, but then that's the bad thing. That's a liability. Right? It's a detraction thing. So in any case, yeah, that's the sort of approach I think. So here's the argument, and the first thing I always want to do is the argument valid? Is it cogent, or is it ill-formed? Now, if you've had any experience reconstructing arguments, premise, conclusion style from prose passages, then you already know it's hard. And it's just not an easy thing to do. And I remember, it really wasn't until I got to graduate school, my first year in graduate school, that I was Feldman's teaching assistant for that year. And we were in a class with about 20 to 25 undergraduates, and there were 2 teaching assistants plus him. So that was the amount of contact the students had with us. And all we did that whole semester long was take letters to the editor type stuff, like popular stuff out of a newspaper, right? And where somebody was arguing for some point, like we should get out of Iraq, or we should invade Syria, or we should, some not philosophical stuff, but just where people are often making arguments. We just took those passages, assigned them to groups of students, and had them try to get arguments like this out of them. Really tough, really, really hard.
Well, sometimes they don't have arguments in them.
Yeah, oh yeah. No, that's the other thing. Yeah. So yeah, just finding some prose, somebody who's actually making an argument in something like an op-ed can be really hard, because a lot of times it's people just saying the same thing over and over, like telling you what their view is, but they're not telling you why we should think it's true.
Yeah, so it's very emotionally driven.
It is, yeah. So there's 2 kinds of people right there: the argument makers and the conclusion staters. And you don't want to be the conclusion stater. You want to be an argument maker. Give reasons for your thoughts, for your beliefs. So this is valid, and that's good, right? Because the only other option is some sort of inductive argument, some sort of cogent argument. And if an argument's not valid or cogent, then it's ill-formed and you're done, unless you want to start over and recast it. So then the next question is, what about the premises? Are they credible? Should we believe them? Feldman considers 3 different responses, right, to this alternative hypotheses argument. So I'm going to let you guys help me out now. Dominic, you want to go back to your points at this point, or do we want to work up to it?
Yeah, sure. Now, like I said, I found the IPJ pretty attractive.
Yeah, immediate perceptual justification. So we can, I don't care what order we talk about them in.
Okay. And the main reason why I thought it so attractive is because he was saying you have immediate prima facie justification.
Yeah.
So basically, it was you have at least some reason immediately to believe what you're experiencing is true.
Yeah.
But then once you have further evidence, because I think we're all aware that our senses are deceived at times.
Yeah.
But typically, we realize our senses are deceiving us after we get better information. And once we get better information, then according to IPJ, we're justified in disregarding our first
initial impressions or whatever.
Exactly. And that seemed pretty attractive. And then when he first talked about a baby being ad hoc, I kind of disregarded that. Well, I didn't disregard it, but I kind of said, well, it doesn't seem as if it's really ad hoc, because it seems like as if naturally, if we experience something, we have at least initial justification for believing that it's true until we get
reasons to think otherwise.
Yeah, reasons to think otherwise. I was like, so it doesn't really seem like it's just ad hoc.
Mm-hmm.
But then when he came to the 3 people in the garden,
that's a little cool.
I thought it was a very interesting thought experiment, probably one of the better ones that I've came across.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, I thought IPJ perfectly explained why the 3 people would see something different.
Let's read the case for us, if you don't mind. It helps me save my voice. So.
3 people, expert, novice, and ignorant, are standing in a garden looking at a hornbeam tree. They have a clear and unobstructed view of the tree. The visual appearance present to each of the 3 in the garden is exactly the same. Minor differences due to their slight different positions are relevant to the example. Expert knows a lot about trees and can easily identify most trees, including this one, immediately. Novice knows a little about trees, but is unfamiliar with hornbeams. Ignorant does not know anything about trees. He does not know which of the things in the garden is a tree unless he's a flower.
Yeah, he's really having trouble.
Yeah, and so and so Feldman presented a question. He was like, so if you're going to defend IPJ, how do you explain what these people are experiencing? And my response to the discussion I said, well, I'm going to respond to this with a parallel thought experiment.
Okay.
It's slightly more simple, I thought.
Yeah.
And see if we can't see how IPJs at work here. So I said that there's two people. You have Carl, who's a car guy, and Nate, who's not a car guy.
Okay.
Carl takes Nate to a car show, and Carl, they come up to I used the example of the 1967 Chevy GT500 for Gone in 60 Seconds.
Oh yeah, great car, right?
Yeah.
Everybody
Eleanor,
wants that.
Eleanor.
Well,
And so I said, well, Carl being a car guy, he stopped and he was in awe of it, and he was really enjoying the experience. Whereas Nate, he wasn't a car guy. All he saw was just like an older style looking Mustang, and he didn't care about it at all, really. And I was like, well, what would you say these people are experiencing? I was like, I think everyone can agree that they're both viewing the same car, but due to a lack of knowledge, Nate doesn't know exactly what he's looking at, and that's exactly why he doesn't care what he's looking at, whereas Carl does care, because due to his lack of knowledge, if he had the same knowledge, then maybe he'd care a little more, have a little more respect for what he was looking at. But it can explain how we can view the same thing,
right.
but have different experiences while viewing it. You know what I mean? So it's like, if, let's say you go to a concert, and let's say I have no idea who the Rolling Stones are. I was like, there's a bunch of old dudes jumping around on stage right now. But let's say you grew up watching the Rolling Stones or listening to the Rolling Stones, you'd have like a greater experience or a greater appreciation for it.
Right. Okay, good, thanks. So let me get some of this other folks in here.
Yeah, it's the same kind of idea. It seems like there's something about the like contingent or background kind of knowledge or background color that affects like the thing you're looking at. Like not literal color, but so I don't know. Yeah, for the tree example, it's they would have to all be seeing the same thing in like in a strictly like concrete sense, but because of those contextual things and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can see what he says here. I mean, let's see. So, a question the defender of IPJ must face is this: what do these people experience? That is, do they all have the same experiences of it being the case that there's a horn being a tree before them, or that there's a tree before them, or that there's a green and brown object before them, or do they have experiences of different content? If defenders of IPJ say that they all have all have an experience as of there being a horn being there, then their theory seems to yield the incorrect result that even novice and ignorant are justified in believing that there's a horn being there. If they say that they all have an experience as of there being a tree there, then the theory seems to yield the incorrect result that even ignorant is justified in believing that the thing he's looking at is a tree. Perhaps then defenders of IPJ should say that the experience is just as of its being the case that there's something partially green and partially brown there. While not obviously unacceptable, this makes the content of what's immediately justified more limited than defenders of the theory seem to have in mind. So supposedly you get immediate prima facie justification, right? Perceptual justification, just based on how it looks. Maybe we should spell it out up here a little bit more. So, Pryor's got a version here, and Chisholm has a version. Pryor says, my view is that whenever you have an experience as of P, you thereby have immediate prima facie justification for believing P. Your experiences do not in the same way give you immediate prima facie justification for believing that you're dreaming, being deceived by a demon, or that any of the other skeptics' hypotheses obtain. And I guess the question is, why not? I mean, what is it about, and so there's a couple problems, right? I mean, one, how is it that the immediate perceptual justification, how is it that these experiences, perceptual experiences as of something's being the case, how is it that they justify the corresponding beliefs? Especially, and this is why the three people in the garden case is good, and I like your case too, Dominic, because I'm a car guy too. So I can appreciate that. It's hard, right? Because presumably they're all having the same visual presentation, but they get justified in believing different things. And he says at the bottom down here, he says, it's possible defenders can argue that background information, which seems to be what everybody's thinking, right? Well, they've got some background beliefs, and that explains the difference between the novice and the expert, right? Can affect what one's experiences are like. Thus, even though expert, novice, and ignorant all have the same visual experience, expert has an experience as of its being the case that there's a horn being tree, while neither novice nor ignorant has an experience of that proposition being true. Novice novice and presumably expert have an experience of it being the case that there is a tree there, but ignorant doesn't. It's still kind of a puzzling thing, right? I mean,
well, I think that they, all three of them experienced the same thing at the lowest common denominator.
yeah.
They're just kind of they're processing the information.
But if you apply it to, like, all three of them are experiencing the same thing at the highest common denominator, then, then yeah, of course they would be experiencing the same thing. It's like, if Feldman walked in this room right now, I have no idea what he looks like,
Right.
you'd be like way more excited to see him, and you'd be like,
Right.
oh my gosh, and, Feldman just walked in here.
It looks the same, but we get justified in believing different things.
Whereas, if you walk in here right now, I'd be like, just some man walked in here. But we'd both be experiencing that, a man just walked in the door. And at the lowest common level, but at the highest level, yeah, obviously we'd have two different experiences because, maybe not two different experiences, but just two different levels of experience or something like that, or intensification of experiences or something like that maybe, because you have like more knowledge in that scenario.
Yeah, different background beliefs, right?
It's like less well connected to those like contextual things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a similar kind of puzzle that gets discussed sometimes called having to do with, they call it the Rain Man example. People saw Rain Man. You guys remember that? So there's that scene in Rain Man where the toothpicks spill on the floor, and he says, I forget what it is, but it's like 64, 64, 64, and and it adds up to some number, whatever. And Tom Cruise is like, what? The waitress looks at the box and it's some different number and it's off by like 2.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom Cruise is like, close, good try, or something like that. Then it turns out that there's still 2 toothpicks in the box or something, right? So you got it right. So the idea is that Tom Cruise and Rain Man both are looking at the toothpicks on the floor, right? Tom Cruise isn't justified in believing that there are 242 toothpicks on the floor. Rain Man immediately, just based on his visual experience, is presumably now here's where it's hard to say, is he justified in believing that that's how many are there, just based on that visual appearance? I think a lot of people are kind of tempted to say, yeah, he is. Because he's, what is it about it? Something clearly different in how his brain's working, right? And presumably other beliefs, other inferences that he's able to make just based on that visual presentation. But there's a puzzle here. Feldman's pretty, I was just reading back through what he says here. He's fairly generous, right? He says, look, defenders of IPJ can spell out the application and review to this example in a way that may yield the desired results, but it must be admitted that the idea of what it is for one to have an experience as of its being the case that P is not super clear. Some better account of how all that works is needed. One has the sense that defenders of this view are simply saying whatever they must to achieve the desired results. A more general theoretical basis for their view is desirable. But then on the next page, he says these considerations aren't decisive. They don't refute the idea. And I like the idea too, Dominic. I've always, in fact, for a while, I was kind of thinking about part of a dissertation project that involved trying to sort of trying to provide those details in some way, right? How it is that based on things looking certain ways, we get justified in the corresponding beliefs. Because one of the things you'll notice that he does there, right, is that you can describe something, you can describe a certain state of affairs at a really high level of generality or very precisely, right? So there's those 3 different levels. It looks like a hornbeam. I'm being appeared to as if by a hornbeam tree versus I'm being appeared to by a tree versus just some green thing, right? And so obviously it seems like their background knowledge is definitely coming into play there, but the fact that they all have the same visual experience, or do they? Does it really look different to the expert than it looks to, say, the novice or the person who completely doesn't know anything? Yeah.
I thought he kind of really just brushed over this point, but on the bottom, the last paragraph, or the second last paragraph on 146, or the last full paragraph on 146, where he started saying it's possible that defenders of IPJ would defend their view by appealing to considerations similar to those used in the defense of inductive reasoning. I was like, it kind of seems right, so the same reasons were justified in applying inductive reasoning to certain cases where it's necessary seem to be similar to the reasons why we're allowed to at least have prima facie, immediate prima facie justification for believing our experiences are the way they are. You know, because typically, if you think about it, like, you know, in most cases, like let's say when you're on a roller coaster and you're going for that first drop, like your immediate prima facie justification feels like you're gonna fall, like that you're gonna like go over the edge and like you're gonna crash and die.
Right.
But then once you get to the bottom, you realize you're not, then like you're immediately justified believing that was like silly. So then when you hop on another roller coaster again, you realize like, hey, it's probably not gonna happen.
Right.
You know?
What's weird about it, it's kind of, I mean, at least for me, it may be different for you if you're like a roller coaster enthusiast and very experienced with these things. But what's strange about a lot of these perceptual illusions is that even they're, once they've been explained to you, they still feel or they still look the same way. Right? I mean, like you've seen the I think it's the Mueller-Lyer diagram where you have the line segment with the arrow point, the arrowhead's going one direction, in versus out, and the one looks longer than the other, and you measure them and you're convinced that they're the same based on measurement, but it doesn't stop it from still looking that way, right? I mean, I won't be able to do it very well because...
See, one of these titles, like the next chapter to me, is like, because they talk about the evolutionary aspect of this, and I thought that was
right.
interesting.
Something roughly like that. So these guys are supposed to be exact same length, but this one's supposed to appear as longer than that one to most folks.
Well, then it's even like you know the flight houses where like you have you're walking across that like it's that straight bridge, but you're in that big cylinder that's rotating like this, and it makes you feel like you're falling over.
Right.
And like I mean, like you kind of do feel like you're falling over. You can't really walk that straight until you look down, and you're fine. You know what I mean? Like so,
and even when you take that first plunge on the next roller coaster ride, it's still gonna feel like you're gonna fall out of the seat or
because I think for the same reason, like I still think that like you still have that feeling of like I'm falling out of the seat is because it's like same with induction. Like every other case when you've rode the roller coaster before, you know like you're about to fall out and you feel like you're about to fall out, then you realize like everything's okay. But just because every other time it's been okay doesn't mean that's necessarily
that's true. There are roller coaster accidents.
Yeah,
for sure.
Or even like when you go into the fun house or whatever, you know, like okay, well, every other time I've like seen these other little optical illusions, they've just been an optical illusion, but I don't really know for sure until you get out and be like, okay, that was just an optical illusion. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you can see what he says down here at the sort of he's critical of this, right? He says, where is it? Analogously, defenders of IPJ might claim believing common sense external world propositions on the basis of perceptual experiences just is good reasoning. That's constitutive of good reasoning. Yet, to many, the cases seem importantly different. There must be, the critics contend, some explanation of why the experiences we have justify the beliefs that they do. Unlike PFR, that was the sort of revised past to future principle, the one that has to do with knowing that past cases have been a certain way, gives you reason for thinking that unobserved cases, future cases will be that way, right? Principles such as IPJ and Chisholm's principle about perception are not fundamental principles. There's a second and possibly related difficulty for IPJ. The principle makes use of the idea of a person having an experience as of P's being the case. This idea may seem reasonably clear. When you look at a table, you have an experience as of its being the case that there's a table there. When you see a book, you have an experience as of its being the case that there's a book before you. However, there's a difficult question about this idea that's brought up by the point. So that's when we get to the three people in the garden case, right? Yeah, I mean, I'm probably a little bit more sympathetic to it maybe than he is too, because I kind of like this idea, but it's certainly there are questions, right? I mean, we've got some of the stuff here we've already talked about. Trying to think. There's more we want to say about immediate prima facie justification.
But I think the reason that when he says prima facie justification,
It's still feasible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that's what makes it believable. Is because he just says, "Oh, you have immediate justification." It's like, well, not so. The prima facie is like a little nice little clause in there. It's like you have reason until otherwise proven. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. I mean, so like right now, I'm having the experience as of this cup on the table, my Tate Street coffee cup. I have no reasons for thinking that the situation's funny, that I'm somehow the victim of a prank or some sort of psychology experiment. But, you know, as far as I know, holograms are rare in this area. Holographic projector machines are not something that are common in my experience. On and on and on. Yeah.
It's funny because I had prima facie justification in my dream.
Yeah.
But then it got a nice quick update.
Yeah.
So
I got a quick
I woke
update.
up. Yeah, that was my
Yeah.
my evidence. For believing this.
Actually, the other day, I mean, this is like another kind of one of those situations, but when I went to vote the other day, I pulled into the parking spot and the person next to me immediately started pulling out and it like really messed with my head. I thought I was moving. It's like
Yeah.
it's
one of those.
Yeah, no, it freaked me out, but then I looked down real quick and I saw that I had my foot on the brake and I felt it, but it was just like, oh
Yeah.
man. So
That reminds me, again, this is a bit of a tangent, but we can have some fun today. There's that scene in Jaws. Everybody saw Jaws, I hope, at some point, right? It's a masterpiece of a film. It's good early Spielberg. But there's that scene where Chief Brody or whatever, he's sitting on the beach, and he sees the little boy on the float kind of be pulled under. And if you go back and you watch that, it's a really great shot. I'm not sure exactly how I did it because I'm not a director of photography, but it's technically cool because it's kind of like the camera's, he kind of comes, his face goes into the frame, but it's like they're pulling back at the same time, but his face is getting close.
Oh,
So you
they
get this
did that
weird
in a
effect.
Halloween movie. They did that in Halloween 4.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, where Michael Myers was standing in the gas station and he was down the hall.
Yeah.
They zoomed in
Oh, yeah.
in the hall, but he was still standing.
I
in the
remember that
same
shot
spot.
too. Yeah, that's probably one of my, this is way off topic, but I'm a huge closet horror fan, you know. Halloween is probably my favorite franchises. I mean, but mostly the first one. I mean, the first one to me is,
Oh, first one's classic.
yeah, that's in my top 5 favorite horror films of all time. But the second one I think is really good too. I mean, understudy Rick Rosenthal did that, and he's good. It has the look of a Carpenter film, even though it
Then they
wasn't
messed it
Carpenter.
up with Halloween 3.
Then it went, it started to go south, and then they tried to recover from 4 through 7. Yeah. Anybody else here a horror fan? Got any horror fans? A little bit? Yeah. All right, cool.
Blair Witch Project.
Yeah.
It was a bad idea to do that in 3rd grade.
Yeah. Can imagine so. Well, what about before we go to the last one, which is the one that I think he's leaning for, right?
Just skip that.
What about epistemological conservatism? Somebody want to tell us what that is?
Yeah, I liked that one.
Did you?
Yeah, I like that one.
Seems pretty economical overall as like a principle. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't have that much explanatory power. It didn't, obviously, but
Yeah, I liked it for that reason. It was simple and straight to the point.
Well,
If you don't have evidence to the rival position, then
Yeah, I mean,
just keep your beliefs the way it is.
Dominic shaking his
I
head.
didn't like it because I thought his example 7.2 was pretty clear because it doesn't like the principle itself. I mean, yeah, common sense will say inconsistent judgment, but the principle itself, I don't think he.
Yeah, read us that example, somebody.
Detective Jones has definitely narrowed down the suspects in a crime to 2 individuals, Lefty and Righty. There are good reasons to think that Lefty did it. There are equally good reasons to think that Righty did it. There's conclusive reason to think that no one other than Lefty or Righty did it. And then later down, he says, what does he say? Suppose Jones came upon the evidence about Lefty first, and so reasonably came to believe that Lefty did it. Because according to the principle, whatever evidence you come across first, you gotta stick with that.
See, this is a worry, right? Well, I mean, so I formulated it a little bit differently than Feldman did, but so I have this the idea that the view that, or what this was like a hot topic back in the day. Actually, when I was there at U of R, one of my buddies who was in grad school, he wrote his dissertation on conservatism and epistemology with Feldman, a guy named Rob Epperson. The view that a person's justified in retaining an existing belief unless the person's evidence provides better support for a rival belief. And as you say, I mean, you may think, well, that sounds pretty good. I mean, and he gives some nice analogies with practical matters, right? Like daily affairs, like, you know, you've got a car already, and you're contemplating this other car, and after doing the pros and cons, you realize that I wouldn't be any better off in any interesting respect. And so then what's the point of trading the one car for the other? You just keep the car you got. So it's kind of conservative in that sense. I always thought the label was kind of misleading though, because what it really kind of conceals and what Feldman's pointing out is that it looks like all it takes to get a belief justified is just keep that belief, right? So in this case here with Lefty and Righty, if he just went ahead and believed that Lefty did it, possibly on bad grounds, right? Then conservatism says, you know, unless you've got some reason, some rival reason to think otherwise, stick with it.
But they do. because knowing that the evidence for them is both equal gives them evidence to not pick one of them. At least that's how mine is.
Yeah. So I mean, in a case like this where the evidence for lefty and righty is equally good, or there's no evidence either way for either one of them, what you should do is suspend judgment, right? You shouldn't believe either one of them did it. But it looks like as long as you believe lefty did it, right? Then you get the idea is that a belief gains some positive epistemic status just in virtue of being held, right? I mean, let's see what he says. He says, what should Jones think about the two suspects? Under the circumstances, it's clear it would be unreasonable for him to think that lefty did it and not righty, right? It would be equally unreasonable for him to think that about righty. He should suspend judgment, right? Furthermore, the mere fact that he already believes that one of them, say lefty, did it is of no epistemological significance. Suppose Jones came upon the evidence about lefty first, and so reasonably came to believe that lefty did it. Once he learns that there's equally good reason for thinking righty did it, he should drop that first belief, right? So I'm kind of with Dominic on this one, I think. I mean, not as big a fan of it. I can't remember when I came up with this argument down here, but so if epistemological conservatism is true, then necessarily lack of better support for a rival belief is enough to make an existing belief justified for a person. That doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, it doesn't to me at least. I don't know what you guys think.
If we take justification to be more of like an incremental thing than like a binary thing, would that work out better? To say like you'd be more justified in believing something, even though it's like you don't, like for the second part, like you don't have any rival beliefs, so it doesn't like justify it well, but it justifies it because it's the only information you have to go on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's better to use some information that's bad than none. Well, presumably that might not be the case.
Well, maybe if you're thinking of this like this sort of Bayesian conditionalizing thing or something.
I mean,
Where kind of convert, if you just keep updating based on
Yeah.
non-extreme priors or something, you do it the right way, then you'll eventually it'll converge or something. Yeah, I mean, I could see the sort of the appeal. I mean, you know, I guess the worry I have is that it just seems like, why would just the mere fact that you've got a belief have any epistemological significance, right? I mean, like, but there are some hard puzzles here, right? Because think about how like children form beliefs, or babies, right? I mean, you get a baby and the baby doesn't have a language yet, and so who knows what's going on in the baby's mind. There are people that study this, I'm sure, developmental psychologists and neonatologists and people like that, and infant neuroscience folks or whatever, trying to understand what a child's mind is like. So it's a little baby, it hasn't yet acquired language, no real conceptual framework. And then somewhere along the way, it goes from that to starting to acquire concepts gradually, right? Color concepts or shape concepts. You know, the parents start teaching the kid, right? So then the kid gets to a point where they finally have mental states that rise to the level of like proto-beliefs or real beliefs or something. And so they happen on to one or two of those things. Just in virtue of the fact that they've got that belief, it's somehow automatic. I mean, because there's a part of me that sometimes thinks, well, look, I mean, our epistemological theory ought to be able to account for their justified beliefs, the things they know. I don't know what the point is where they cross the line, right? And can be said to finally start having beliefs or things like beliefs or have knowledge. They know, babies know how to do a lot of things before they know that very much is the case, clearly, right? So they know how to crawl, but they don't know that the cup is on the table, right? They know something maybe more general than that. There's some object in my vision, you know, in front of me or whatever. So I don't know, I'm kind of puzzled about this idea that I can see why it's tempting for people, right? To say, well, look, I mean, a belief has to have something going for it just by virtue of the fact that a person holds it. But people hold all kinds of crazy beliefs, right? People believe, I mean, you know, imagine that you're raised in a cult setting. You've been indoctrinated your whole life to, you know, to have certain beliefs, and they're not based on any kind of evidence of any sort, right? The fact that you're not aware of any rivals out there could be for all kinds of reasons, right? Like you're in a cult. People in cults don't tend to get a lot of information about the outside world. They wouldn't be aware. They're purposely kept unaware of rivals. You know. So yeah, I mean, but I can see some of the attraction.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it in terms of the external world, whether or not you're dreaming or a brain in the vat. I don't believe I'm in a brain in the vat, or that I'm dreaming or anything right now. And of course, that could change. I could wake up right now.
Right, you didn't believe you were in the dream with Vandervassen either, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I didn't. In fact, I said that in the dream. I was like, oh, see, I thought so. I thought I wasn't dreaming.
Right.
And then I woke up. It's
Yeah.
like, I am a kind of skeptic, not really an external world skeptic, because I hold beliefs that there is an external world.
Right, and you think you're justified in those, and at least a lot of the time they amount to knowledge, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What was that movie? It was, it's a recent one, and I know you guys will have seen it. I tried to watch it, it was during Christmas a couple of years back. My family was making a bunch of noise and talking, and I couldn't, and you really, it's one of those films where you really needed to focus.
Inception.
But, yeah, that's it.
Oh yeah.
He said in the film, don't make whole places based on the real world. Only just pull out elements like a street lamp, never whole locations, because you could lose your grip on reality. You wouldn't know whether or not you're in a dream.
I'll have to go back and rewatch that one, because that was pretty,
Yeah, it was pretty good.
it was intense, right? I mean, that, like,
It was
really,
intense.
yeah, some dream within a dream type stuff, or
Yeah, it was awesome.
everything's always been a dream, nested dreams.
It's like, how do you know when you're at the final layer? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is a trick with the movie, though.
Yeah.
That lets you know that this is reality versus the dream.
I remember there was some, like a coin spinning kind of thing or something, wasn't there?
Yeah, it was a spinning top, but there's something else.
Oh, there's something else
There's
there,
something
too.
else. They don't talk about it. It's,
Yeah.
it's something you gotta.
I'm
curious.
Has everyone watched the movie?
I've seen
Yeah.
it multiple times. I've looked at this.
Oh, yes, I mean, it's spoiler alerts for those who
It's,
haven't seen it.
Look at Leo's wedding ring. Whenever he's in a dream, he has a wedding ring on, but in reality, he doesn't.
Oh.
So if you look at his left hand,
Interesting.
you have to keep a close eye out for it because it's really quick.
Do we see this at the end of the movie? This is a massive spoiler.
It is kind of a massive spoiler.
A massive spoiler.
I feel like I know what's going on at the end of the movie, but just for the sake of keeping you guys in suspense.
Okay, alright. As long as we've been talking about films a lot today for some reason, another great film that's on this kind of stuff. I'm a big film buff anyway, so I feel like, you know, films can often engage, I mean, you guys already like philosophy, but
Yeah.
imagine 80 freshmen, you know, in a 101 type course, right? To engage them, I'll often at least make reference to films that they can go watch on their own. We can't really do it in a classroom, but Vanilla Sky, Cameron Crowe film. If you like Tom Cruise, then you'll love it. But even if you don't like Tom Cruise, he's pretty good in that film, and it raises a lot of these same kind of questions about dream state versus reality, you know, and in a better way, in my opinion, than The Matrix. I've tried to watch The Matrix so many times, and I just can't get past Keanu Reeves.
Have you seen the anime?
No, I haven't.
It's like the prequel. It's like a bunch of shorts, but I would recommend that because it actually explains how they got to that state. And
Okay.
that's fascinating.
Yeah, I just got so, well, Keanu, you know, he's just so good. He's just like
Could've
such
been
a
Will
horrible
Smith.
actor. But, you know, aside from his bad acting, all the fight sequences too, although they're really cool, they wear on me really fast. Like, it's kind of overdone. A little bit of that would go a long way, I think, you know.
Especially in
But,
circus.
but people love that stuff, so. Well, so the last one that he talks about is, of course, Henry's for the best explanation, right?
This isn't too
Let's see, something about that. So, you know, like I say, he's kind of tough on all of these views. I mean, I know he's going to lean toward entrance to the best explanation. But the variable colleague example, you guys remember that one? Where he's got a colleague, one day he's really friendly, and the next day he's like really grumpy. And so one explanation has to do with, you know, maybe how well he sleeps at night or what he's eaten or whatever. And the other explanation is that he's got an identical twin who is always in a bad mood, and the other twin's always in a good mood, and they rotate days. They're just, yeah.
Not to, you got back to the movie thing. Have you seen Hot Fuzz?
Hadn't seen that.
Yes, that's it.
Okay. It's really weird because it's actually, the more I'm learning about that, a lot of it has to do with like the whole evidence thing, because I mean, he's trying to solve this problem. But the colleague one, there's actually the one character in the movie who, like, the one time he's all like chipper and stuff, and then like they come up later at night and he's got like different hair, and it's actually like two twins. But it's just weird. I'm wondering if they maybe like
Some
Actually, it seems like they could very easily incorporate like epistemology
into that.
movie.
What's it called? Hot fudge.
Hot fuzz.
Hot fuzz.
Hot fuzz.
Okay.
Yeah,
What was
it's,
Simon Pegg.
Okay.
Do you know
it's like
Simon?
Shaun of the Dead, same director.
Okay.
Same as.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, sorry, not.
That's
just-
cool. No, there's another one that for you guys since you're philosophy majors. Check out Waking Life if you haven't seen that already. It's one of those rotoscope deals where they animate over live actors,
I think I.
and it looks really cool. So there's Waking Life, and then there's also Through a Scanner Darkly,
Okay.
and they're
yeah.
both really cool if you're like looking for philosophy films. They're really neat. Good. Well, so then what do people think about the inference to the best explanation stuff?
I really liked it.
Good. You liked it? Yeah.
You mentioned it for you invokes Occam's razor in a way that seems satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, there are some. He points out Peter Lipton's point about the details. You know, when you get into like choosing amongst rival hypotheses or rival theories, there are always going to, there are things that we all know, like Occam's razor. Don't multiply entities beyond necessity. So all things being equal, the simpler hypothesis is preferable. But then to try to explain what makes one hypothesis simpler than another.
That is hard.
Right? I mean, so like think about it. The common sense hypothesis is far from simple. I mean, the common sense hypothesis postulates the existence of all of these lots and lots of ordinary middle-sized objects that are made of matter. God only knows what matter is, right? It's whatever physics tells us it is if they ever finish complete physics. And then when you start realizing, oh my Lord, if everything's made of matter, and matter at the quantum level has all these weird properties that are sort of surprising, not necessarily spooky or supernatural or anything, but just it behaves at the smallest scales in ways that are completely alien to our experience at the macro level, right? I was thinking about this a lot earlier this morning, how it seems like you could make a case for because I've been reading this stuff with you guys and thinking about skepticism a lot lately, and it just struck me that, wow, I mean, I'll have to do a little bit of research in the literature and see if this has been played out a lot already, and maybe I won't be able to get an article out of it, but it'd be nice to get a paper out of it. Just trying, does not the sheer fact that we think we know there's this big gap between quantum scale behavior and macro scale behavior seems to me to be a pretty strong case for kind of skepticism about our common sense view, right? I mean, if all these things that we're in contact with really are just collections of particles, right? And then the particles themselves behave in these really surprising, strange ways. I mean, you get virtual particles that can just pop into existence, and you get things that behave both like particles and waves, and the observation of these things changes, collapses the waveform and causes them to go one way or the other. I mean, you get the entangled particles, you get non-locality. I mean, this is all really weird stuff.
Depending on the interpretation you take, to be fair.
Yeah.
Some actually do seem to be more simple.
There's Copenhagen and many worlds and all this different, but it's surprising. I mean, to me, it's just kind of scary, because I mean, we're sort of riding through life, our consciousness and our experience of each other in the world, kind of taking our experiences at face value, right, for granted. But then physics comes along and tells us this completely different story about what's happening at the smallest scale. And yet, if the macro scale just is the sum of all of the small scale interactions, then how do we bridge that gap? Can we really know? Can we really know what the hell we're in contact with out there at the end of the day? I'm holding something, but then physics tells me that nothing's ever really touching. It's mostly empty space, lattice-like arrays and fields of force. Yeah.
What you said kind of reminds me of the movie Ant-Man. Because in that movie, he shrinks to subatomic levels.
Oh yeah.
And you see him keep shrinking, and he goes past atoms, and he keeps going smaller and smaller. And you see all this weird stuff in the quantum realm, and the smart guy, the doctor in the film, he's like, our human minds can't fathom what's going on at the subatomic level. So when he came out of subatomic, he didn't remember anything.
Right. So he couldn't even. I mean. Who knows, maybe consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality. I mean, wouldn't the views, it's on the table. I mean, it's kind of weird. It takes us more into philosophy of mind, but So in any case, yeah, so this idea, I mean, so one hypothesis is this common sense hypothesis, which is propped up by, and Feldman says this at some point, I forget how he puts it exactly, but something like our common sense hypothesis treated as a scientific one, right? You can then see science as the sort of spelling out the details of the common sense worldview. Well, it gets really, really weird, right? Because like the scientific story is way complicated, propped up by lots of experimental work and lots of mathematics and lots of physics and chemistry and biology and all the bridge disciplines, right? That seems pretty complicated. Here's another hypothesis. I'm just a brain in a vat. Computer stimulating me, or you know, the evil demon's doing it, or God's doing it, or whatever, right? Because those are pretty simple. And as Feldman points out, right, I mean, a lot of conspiracy theories would seem to win out on the measure of just some sheer simplicity. One international, you know, world organization that's out to, you know, perpetrating all these different world events and assassinations and wars or whatnot is a lot simpler an explanation in some senses of the word than what we know to be the real explanations, which are complicated. So, I mean, and simplicity is only one theoretical virtue after all. So, you know, inference to the best explanation isn't equivalent to inference to the simplest explanation. It's just simplicity is one thing we're after. We're after, you know, fruitfulness and testability and predictive value, any kind of novel results that we're able to glean from the theory from using it, and other things, I'm sure. So he ends the chapter there with this last little bit about the kind of parallel between inference to the best explanation and being aware that something is the best explanation. And that's a subtlety. That's kind of a point that can go by pretty fast on like 150 to 151 there, the two parallel arguments. So it's not just that you're justified in believing whatever is the best explanation. It's you're justified in believing whatever you have reason for thinking is the best explanation. Because presumably the best explanation would always be the actual explanation, the true explanation, right? I was having a discussion with somebody about this a long time ago, but it was funny, we were talking about, isn't identity always the best explanation in certain kinds of cases, like the reason why so-and-so looks like Smith is because it is Smith. That would seem to be, you know, but there are lots of other cases where, like if I see someone on campus and I'm having the experience as of that person being Taylor Swift, probably not justified in believing that on that basis. What would Taylor Swift be doing wandering around UNCG, right? But on the other hand, an immediate perceptual experience as of Taylor Swift that's really, really, really convincing, right? The best explanation would seem, in some ways, it's compelling to think, well, it's because it is Taylor Swift. I mean, the best explanation of you looking like Tyler is that you are Tyler.
That's true.
You're identical with that person, you know? So, fun stuff to think about. So he points that out. I thought that was slick. And then in the very, very end, he talks about contextualism, which is sort of relevant to Tyler's article that you're doing, the Lewis elusive knowledge. And contextualism is a view in epistemology that got real popular in the 2000s, the early 2000s, I would say, late 90s. Keith DeRose is a famous contextualist in epistemology. There's attributor context, contextualism, and speaker context, so or subject context. So some people think that whether or not you know depends on contextual aspects that are relevant to the subject. Other people take the contextual aspects to be the ones that the attributor is sort of influenced by. So if I say, you know, John is tall, right, is that true or not? Well, it kind of depends on some contextual features of the case, right? I mean, if he's a 5-year-old kid versus an NBA basketball player or whatever, it seems like whether I've said something true or false could shift in a case like that, right? So some people think that knows works like that. And it always seems to me like it's kind of like having your cake and eating it too, though. It's too good to be true, because what happens is in ordinary context like this, low standards context, we typically routinely satisfy the demands, and we can be said correctly to know that there are people in the room with us, and that the projector's on, and that it's sunny outside, all this stuff. But then when you take my class, and we're we're talking about epistemology and you've been bombarded with skeptical hypotheses for an hour, then all of a sudden you start thinking, maybe I really don't know all of these things. And the good news is you're right both times. And it's like, really? I mean, because it seems to me like a lot of time, like once I consider the skeptical hypotheses, whether I'm a philosophy student in an epistemology class or whether I'm just a regular person who somebody's brought that possibility up to. Me and my mom are having a conversation. My mom's far from a philosopher, right? And she says she knows blah, blah, blah. And I say, Mom, are you sure you really do? Think about, and I mention a couple of other possibilities. And then she might say, well, now that you've mentioned that, I guess I'm not really so sure. All right, well then you didn't know after all. You thought you knew. You had apparent knowledge, but you didn't have real knowledge. So I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm less nuts about contextualism, but it is very popular. And certainly people are still writing about this stuff today. So, very good. Well, I'm going to try to call it quits if you guys are good. If people have questions, I'm happy to say more, but otherwise, I'm going to rest my voice. Cool. Very good, guys. Enjoyed it. See you next time. Like I said, I'll post an announcement on Canvas.